The Cathali fleet commander Osvan had seen 43 wars across 6 star systems, and he had learned one immutable truth about every species that ever dared oppose his kind. Cut their voices, and you cut their will. He watched the human convoy on his tactical display. 7 ships, mid-weight transport class, escorted by 3 vessels his analysts classified as light combat configuration. They were moving through the Caraxes corridor, that narrow band of navigable space between 2 dense asteroid fields, exactly where his ambush had been waiting for 11 days. The humans had no idea. They never did. Species that relied so heavily on their communication networks always telegraphed their movements through those very same networks, and the Cathali had spent 2 years learning every encryption protocol, every frequency band, every data handshake the human interstellar navy used. When Osvan gave the order to engage the jamming array, the result was absolute. One moment, the human ships were exchanging navigational data and tactical updates. The next, they were islands, completely, perfectly alone. He allowed himself a quiet moment of satisfaction. His fleet, 19 warships arranged in a crescent formation that would close around the convoy like a fist, was the finest thing the Cathali Naval Command had ever assembled for a single operation. The firepower ratio was 6-1 in his favor. The tonnage ratio was worse for the humans, closer to 9-1. By every metric his command staff had calculated, this engagement should last no more than 4 standard minutes before the surviving human crew members began transmitting surrender signals. Except they would not be able to transmit, because Osvan had already taken their voices. His tactical officer Valak leaned close. "Commander, the convoy has registered the jamming. We're seeing course corrections. They appear to be attempting to form a defensive arrangement." Osvan almost smiled. Let them. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that one of those 3 escort ships carried a woman who had stopped waiting for orders 7 months ago, and what she had built in the meantime would unravel everything Osvan believed about warfare itself. Her name was Mia Hartwell, and she had not slept in 31 hours. She stood at the center of the ISS Warden's Combat Information Center, with her arms crossed and her eyes moving across 3 different holographic displays simultaneously, and she felt the jamming the moment it hit. Not because an alarm told her, not because a readout changed, but because the ambient noise of the ship's communication systems simply vanished. The way a sound you've stopped noticing only becomes real when it disappears. "There it is," she said. Lieutenant Reed Calloway looked up from his station. He was 26, 2 years out of the academy, and he had the kind of face that still registered surprise at things that surprised him. "We've lost all external comms. Broad spectrum suppression. Commander, the Fenwick and the Aldgate won't be receiving our signals either." "I know. So we can't coordinate with the escort flight." "I know, Reed." He paused, watching her, and she could see him working through the tactical math the same way everyone always did. Lost communications equals lost coordination equals catastrophically degraded combat effectiveness. The Cathali had pioneered this doctrine 30 years ago, and used it to dismember the Drelhari defensive fleet at the Battle of Ixelion. 11 ships against 44, and the Cathali had won because the Drelhari commanders couldn't talk to each other. Everyone in the Navy had studied that battle. Everyone had drawn the same conclusion. Communication jamming, at scale, was effectively decisive. Everyone except Mia. The truth about Mia Hartwell was something her service record didn't fully capture. It noted her posting to the Caraxes defensive line, her cross-training in signals architecture, her tactical rating of distinguished. It did not note that 7 months ago, during a 3-week communications blackout on a forward observation post on Veltheon Station, she had been the only officer present when a Cathali patrol swept the sector. She had coordinated a 6-person defense using nothing but hand signals, physical timers, and a series of prearranged behavioral protocols she had invented on the spot. When rescue arrived, all 6 personnel were alive. 2 Cathali patrol craft were wreckage. The official report had attributed the survival to favorable positioning and terrain utilization. She had read that report and felt something crystallize inside her, something cold and precise and patient. Favorable positioning, as if the universe had done it for her. After Veltheon, she had spent 7 months building something. Not a weapon, not a tactical system, something older than both. The jamming was still screaming silently across every band. Osvin's fleet was 18 minutes out. She said, "Execute Protocol Warden 7. Nothing happened. That was the first thing Osvin noticed when the engagement timer crossed the 4-minute mark, and his tactical display still showed 3 human escort ships moving in coherent, coordinated formation. They were not simply surviving, they were maneuvering. "Valak," he said. "What are they doing?" Valak was quiet for a moment, staring at the display with the focused stillness of a predator watching prey behave incorrectly. "They appear to be repositioning the transport ships. The escorts are moving to cover specific angular approaches. Commander, they are adapting to our fleet formation. They cannot know our fleet formation. We are still outside visual range. They appear to know it anyway. Osvan leaned forward. The human convoy had, in the 11 days he had been waiting in the Caraxes corridor, arranged itself in what his analysts had dismissively logged as a standard defensive cluster, the kind of formation a nervous convoy commander instinctively falls back on, optimized for nothing in particular and vulnerable to the precise crescent envelopment his fleet was designed to execute. He had banked on it. He had built his entire ambush geometry around it. In the last 4 minutes, without receiving a single communication signal from any external source, the 3 escort ships had reformed. They were no longer clustered. They were distributed, separated by distances that made sense only if you knew exactly where Osvan's flanking ships were positioned. The transports had moved too, tucking into the gaps between the escorts in a pattern that was mechanically, geometrically precise. It should have been impossible. Increase jamming intensity, Osvan ordered. All bands, maximum power. Already at maximum, Commander. He stared at the display for a long moment. Then he said something he had never said in 43 wars. How? She had built it out of light, specifically out of directional laser pulses, tight beam optical signals operating at frequencies no one would think to jam because no one still used them, because every modern military had long since abandoned optical communication as too limited, too slow, too dependent on line of sight in the messy, three-dimensional chaos of space combat. That was the assumption. And like all assumptions about what humans would or wouldn't do, it was wrong. The thing about optical communication in space was that it was, in vacuum, essentially perfect. No atmospheric distortion, no electromagnetic interference, nothing a jamming array could touch. The limitation was line of sight. You needed to see the ship you were talking to. In a dynamic combat environment, that was a genuine problem. Ships moved, formations changed. You couldn't maintain a stable optical link under fire, unless you planned for it, unless you mapped every possible formation geometry in advance, unless you preloaded every ship's navigation computer with a decision tree, not orders, but logic, conditional responses. If the enemy appears from bearing X at velocity Y, then move to position Z and signal the following to adjacent ships using the optical array at angle W. Mia had spent 7 months writing that decision tree. 12,000 conditional branches. She had tested it in simulation 400 times. She had found 367 ways it could fail and patched every one of them. What she had built, essentially, was a way for 3 ships to think together without talking, and the Cathali had no idea it existed. Reed was monitoring the optical array with the quiet focus she'd trained him for. The Fenwick has confirmed repositioning. Aldgate is executing the B-series flank coverage. All 3 transports are within protective geometry. Time to contact? 14 minutes. And the Cathali fleet formation? We're certain? He touched a control, and a 3-dimensional model of the approaching fleet appeared, reconstructed from passive sensor data. Neutrino signatures, gravitational distortion, the faint heat bloom of 19 drives running hot. No active scanning. Nothing that would give away that they were watching. 19 ships, crescent formation. They're going to try to close the horns at about 30,000 kilometers. Exactly where I thought. The word exactly did things to Reed's expression that she found quietly satisfying. She said, "Execute Warden 12." The first shot came at 11 minutes. One of Osvan's flanking ships, the Cathali Kayla, positioned at the northern horn of his crescent, suddenly found itself facing not the transport vessel it had been assigned to intercept, but a human escort ship that had repositioned to meet it head-on. The escort moved as if it had known the Cathali Kayla was there for the last 20 minutes, because it had. The engagement lasted 47 seconds. The human ship took 3 hits. The Cathali Kayla took 9, including 2 that penetrated the secondary hull. Osvan's tactical display showed it dropping to 60% combat effectiveness and falling back from the formation. They anticipated the flanking move, Valak said. His voice carried something Osvan had not heard in it before. Something careful. One lucky repositioning, Osvan said. The second shot came 3 minutes later. The southern horn of the crescent. 3 ships moving in coordinated strike formation found that the gap they were moving to exploit had closed. The human transports had moved away from it with a timing so precise that the 3 Cathali ships found themselves pursuing targets that were no longer where they were supposed to be, now approaching each other on converging vectors that the ISS Warden's navigation computer had calculated would force them to decelerate or risk collision. 2 of them decelerated. The third didn't react fast enough and had to make an emergency course correction that took it out of the formation entirely. The crescent was developing holes. Valak was quiet for a long time. Then, "Commander, they are coordinating. Impossible. The jamming. I don't know how, but they are. Look at the response times. Look at the repositioning geometry. This is not independent action. Each human ship is responding to what the others are doing, in real time, with a latency that is." He checked something, checked it again. Less than 6 seconds. Osvan stared at the display. 6 seconds. In a jamming environment, at combat distances. The number made no sense. She felt the battle differently than most commanders described it. There was no noise, of course. The combat information center of the Warden was cool and humming and lit in the precise amber that she had chosen because it kept her team's eyes from dilating fully, preserving night vision response time. There was no shouting. Reed did not shout. The two ensigns at the secondary stations, Oscar Finch and Whitney Bale, did not shout. Mia had spent 3 months training them out of the reflex to fill silence with sound when under pressure. What she felt instead was the shape of the battle, moving through her like architecture. She could see the Cathali fleet's formation degrading in 3 places simultaneously, and she could feel the point, the precise geometric moment, when the Crescent's advantage would become a liability. "Warden 18, she said. The Aldgate received the optical pulse from the Fenwick, processed the conditional logic, and executed a burn that took it to a position directly between 2 of Osvan's capital ships. From that position, it could fire in 2 directions. From that position, neither Cathali ship could engage it without risking fire on the other. Osvan's fleet, designed for overwhelming coordinated assault, found itself unable to coordinate. This was the part Mia had spent the most time on. It wasn't enough to simply survive the ambush. Survival wasn't the lesson she wanted to teach. She needed the Cathali to understand something, and for that, they needed to experience it fully, the way a hand on a stove teaches heat better than any description. She needed them to feel the ground shift under every assumption they had ever made. Oscar Finch looked up. "Commander, Cathali formation is fragmenting. I'm reading ships breaking from the crescent independently." "How many?" 4. "No. 6. She nodded. "And the lead ship? The command vessel?" "Still in formation, holding position at range." She had been wondering about the Cathali commander. Whoever it was had shown genuine tactical discipline. 11 days of patient waiting, a well-constructed ambush geometry, good use of terrain. Not brilliant, but competent. Competent enough to know, right now, that something had gone badly wrong. She wondered if they were starting to understand why. Osvan understood nothing. He understood that his 19-ship fleet was failing to achieve decisive engagement against 3 escort vessels and 7 transports. He understood that every predictive model his command staff had built was producing outcomes that bore no relationship to what was actually happening on his tactical display. He understood that he had 12 ships still in effective formation, 3 damaged and falling back, and 4 that had broken formation entirely because their local commanders had made independent decisions in the absence of a coherent fleet response. He did not understand how the humans were doing it. Valak came to stand beside him in a way that was not standard protocol, closer than station positions required, like a second set of eyes that needed to look at the same thing. "Commander, I've been running the sensor records. The human ships are using optical signaling." Osvan turned to look at him. "Tight beam laser pulses," Valak continued, "point to point. We weren't looking for it because no one uses it. The technology is 60 years old. The bandwidth is minimal. But in vacuum, at these distances, with preloaded decision logic," he stopped. "Say it. It is unjammable. By any system we have. By any system anyone has. Because it is light, and it travels in a straight line, and it requires no frequencies to suppress." Valak paused. "We planned for every communication system they possessed. We did not plan for a communication system they resurrected." The battle had now been running for 22 minutes. By Osvan's original projections, it should have been over for 18 minutes. His damaged ships were 3, his fragmented formation was 6, and the human convoy, all 7 transports, all 3 escorts, was still coherent, still moving, still thinking together with that eerie 6-second latency that was not latency at all but response time, a thinking organism moving as one body without a central brain. No, that was wrong. There was a central brain. There had to be. Something had designed this. He looked at the ISS Warden, the smallest of the 3 escorts, hanging at the center of the human formation, and he felt, for the first time in 43 wars, something that was not quite fear, but lived in the same neighborhood. "Who," he said quietly, "is commanding that ship?" She didn't know that Osvan had started asking about her. What she knew was that the battle had reached the moment she had designed it to reach, the point at which the Cathali fleet commander would face a choice. Continuing the engagement meant losing more ships to a human formation that was, by every conventional metric, massively outgunned, and yet was performing as though it wasn't. Withdrawing meant admitting that the ambush had failed, that the jamming had failed, that everything the Cathali doctrine of communication suppression was built on had failed. She also knew that there was one more thing left to show them. Because the Cathali commander didn't know about the second layer yet, the optical communication network was the visible layer, the thing Valak had figured out. It was real, and it worked, and it was the reason the convoy was still alive. But Mia had spent the last 3 months adding something to it, something that had nothing to do with technology. She had trained her crews, all 3 escort ships, to respond to the absence of signals as well as their presence. Every ship in the formation had a schedule. Every 30 seconds, each ship sent a specific optical pulse to its neighbors, a heartbeat. If that heartbeat missed 2 cycles, the neighbor ships did not wait for orders. They did not attempt to reestablish contact. They executed the standing contingency response, which was a specific aggressive maneuver designed to relieve pressure on whatever ship had gone quiet. It meant that even if someone jammed the optical array, even if the warden herself was destroyed, the formation would continue to act. Without her. Without anyone. She said to no one in particular, "They're going to hit us now. One concentrated push. They'll try to eliminate the command ship first." Reed looked up. "Let them," she said. 12 seconds later, 4 Cathali ships executed a simultaneous strike run on the ISS Warden. They hit her with everything. Concentrated fire, overlapping fields, a strike pattern designed to overwhelm point defense by sheer volume. The Warden absorbed 3 solid hits. Mia felt the ship shudder. One display went dark. Reed was thrown sideways and caught himself on the console edge. Whitney called out damage readings from the secondary station in a level voice. Hull breach on deck 3, point defense array 7 offline, navigation computer cycling through backup protocols. The Warden's optical transmitter was damaged in the 3rd hit. For 40 seconds, she went dark, and the formation did not stop. The Aldgate and the Fenwick registered the missed heartbeats. They did not hesitate. They executed the standing contingency, driving hard into the gap that the 4 attacking Cathali ships had created by abandoning their defensive positions. The transports, reading the changed formation geometry through their own decision trees, repositioned automatically. The 2 escort ships struck the attacking formation from a vector it had left completely undefended. When the Warden's optical array came back online 40 seconds later, 2 of the 4 attacking Cathali ships were damaged. One was drifting. One had made an emergency withdrawal burn. The Cathali assault had succeeded in silencing the command ship for 40 seconds. It hadn't mattered. Osvin watched his 4-ship assault dissolve in real time and felt the full weight of it settle on him. The thing that lived near fear was no longer near anything. It was present, and it was absolute, and it had a clarity to it that was almost like understanding. He had cut their voices. He had silenced their command ship. He had done everything right, everything by doctrine, everything that had worked in 30 years and 43 wars. The humans had kept fighting, not because their commander had told them to, because she had already told them everything they needed to know. The battle ended not with a surrender, but with a withdrawal. Osman pulled his fleet back in good order. 7 ships damaged, 2 destroyed. His crescent formation dissolved into a scattered defensive arrangement that was adequate for cover, but useless for attack. The human convoy continued through the Caraxes corridor with that same steady, unhurried pace, like something that had simply been briefly inconvenienced. He watched the ISS Warden until it was a point of light, then nothing. Valak stood at his shoulder for a long time without speaking. Finally, 61 engagements on record in which the Cathali jammed a human fleet's communications. 61 victories. Average engagement duration, 4.2 minutes. He paused. "I keep running the numbers on this one. And we had a 6-to-1 firepower advantage. We had complete communication suppression from the first second of engagement. We had a prepared ambush position and 11 days of intelligence on their route." He stopped. "We should have won in 4 minutes. I know. Instead, we took 28 minutes, suffered 2 ships destroyed and 7 damaged, and withdrew from a fight we initiated against a force a tenth our size." He stopped again, longer this time. "I want to understand how." Osvan thought about the Warden, the small, battered escort ship with its damaged hull and its single optical transmitter, commanded by someone he had never seen and did not know. He thought about the decision tree Valak had described, 12,000 branches, 400 simulations, 7 months of work to build a mind that could function without a voice. He thought about what it meant to face an enemy who had already planned for the worst thing you could do to them and had made the worst thing irrelevant. "You want to understand how," he said. "Yes." "Then understand this. We took away their ability to speak, and they had already learned not to need it." He watched the empty space where the convoy had been. "We studied their communications for 2 years. We should have been studying their silences. Mia Hartwell did not celebrate. When the engagement clock crossed the 1 hour mark and the Cathali fleet had been on a withdrawal vector for 20 minutes, she ordered a damage survey, reviewed the injury list, 4 crew, none critical, and began drafting the after-action report. Reed brought her coffee without being asked. She drank it at her station. Oscar Finch said quietly from across the room, "Commander, for what it's worth, that was something." She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the display where the Cathali fleet had been, running through the engagement sequence, finding the 2 places where the decision tree had produced a suboptimal outcome and annotating them for revision. There was always revision. "It worked this time," she said finally. "Next time they'll plan for it. Then we build the next layer?" She picked up her coffee again, took a slow sip. The battle was hours behind her, and the stars outside were the same stars they had always been, cold and indifferent, and absolutely full of species that had been underestimating something for a very long time. "We've already started," she said. In the distance, deep in the corridor of debris and rock and the echoing data signatures of a destroyed engagement, a Cathali fleet commander sat with his hands resting flat on a tactical display and stared at the numbers he would carry with him for the rest of his career. The numbers of a battle that should have lasted 4 minutes and lasted 28, against a human commander who had already fought the worst version of this war inside her own head, months before it ever happened, in a silence nobody thought to be afraid of. He did not know her name. He thought, somehow, that this was appropriate. You do not need to know the name of the fire to know that you have been burned.